So last week we did percents and fractions. Before that, we actually had 2 lessons on fractions and decimals. So we've had fractions and decimals, we've had percents and fractions. Now we're going to have percents and decimals. And what you're going to notice today is that all of these things kind of go together. You're going to start seeing a relationship of how to solve these using different methods that you can use for other conversions. So let's get started. We're going to start with percent to a decimal. Changing a percent into a decimal. And there's 2 ways to do this. And the first way we're going to do this is the fraction method. Okay, writing a percent as a fraction first and then converting it into a decimal. Because we already know how to take a fraction and make a decimal out of it. You've been doing it for many months. So now we just need to know, how do we get from a fraction, or from a percent to a fraction? Well, that was last week's lesson. So these directions are going to look very familiar to you. I have 56% here, and the first thing we're going to do is convert this 56% to a fraction. And you know that a denominator of a percent is always out of how much? 100. The denominator is always 100 because a percent is always out of 100. So the first thing you're going to do is write a fraction with a denominator of 100. Yes, Yuba. Correct. That's what we're doing. We're writing the percent as a fraction so then we can turn our fraction into a decimal. Step 2. Another step that you're going to be familiar with. The numerator is just your percent number. Remember we did this last week? So your percent is 56. It goes over 100 every single time. So in this case, 56% is the same as 56 over 100. Now, if I said keep it as a fraction, you would simplify it. But we're not simplifying it because we don't want it to stay a fraction. We want to make a decimal. And this is the part that you know how to do from a previous lesson of fractions to decimals. And that's going to be write 56 hundredths, or 56 over 100, as a decimal. Now, you can do the long way. You can divide, right? You can put 56 in the house, 100 on the outside. You can add your 0, or annex your 0, add your decimal, do the long division. But we know that all decimals are a place of 10, 100, or 1,000. What's our denominator here? 100, which means it's going to have 2 places, the hundredths place. The first place is 10, the second is the hundredths, so we need 2 places behind the decimal because the denominator is hundredths. What 2 numbers are going to go behind the decimal? 5 and 6, right? Because it's going to be 56 hundredths. We're going to go to 56 hundredths as a decimal, or 0.56. Done. Easy. Now we have this 56%, and it is now 56 hundredths, or 0.56. Yes, Mason. Denominator of a percent will always be 100. When we're talking about percent, it's always out of 100. All right, let's do a practice one. You ready? Still writing? A couple people? No, just for this method. Oh, just kidding. I'm going to give you method 2 first, then we'll practice. Trick. I tricked you. Ha, ha, ha. All right, this is method 2. And it's not a fraction. It's moving the decimal. And it's not really a shortcut, but I like to think of it as a shortcut because, to me, this method is much quicker than converting it to a fraction and then converting it to a decimal. right? It's almost like you got to do 2 steps to go from a percent to a decimal. You got to throw that fraction in there. Okay, this one's a little bit quicker. So here's our example of 29%. And I want to convert 29% into a decimal. So the first step is to remove the percent sign. So we're just going to write the number 29. Put your head up. I can't see the board when you're laying down the wrong way. So now we have this number 29. And step 2 is to put the decimal at the end of a whole number. It's not really anything new. We talked about this when we did decimals. Every single whole number ever, since preschool, kindergarten, has always had a decimal point behind it. But you never wrote them down, right? You never put that decimal point because we didn't have anything in the tenths or the hundredths place, so you didn't need the decimal point. But you can always add that decimal point because every number has it. 29 is the same as 29.0, right? So we're going to put that decimal there, right at the end of our whole number, in between the ones and the tenths place. So really all we've done is taken this 29% and put a decimal after it. Now, step 3 is how you make that into a decimal number. And that's going to be to move the decimal 2 places to the left. So if I have this 29 with a decimal, the decimal is going to move to the left once, twice, and become 29 hundredths, or 0.29. I said what? It is going to the left. The decimal is moving to the left. It starts over here at the 9 and it moves to the left and to the left again. Left. Yes. Always 2 places. Why do you think we move the decimal 2 places? Well, what if we had a single digit percent? What if we only had 9%? We would still move it. Why would we move it 2 times? A percent is out of 100, or the hundredths. Okay, the hundredths has 2 places behind the decimal. So we're going to move it 2 times. Our decimal is always out of hundredths, or in the hundredths place. So it's 29 hundredths. We have to move the decimal twice so that 9 gets in the hundredth place. All right, now let's do a practice. Okay, so the first one is write 8% as a decimal, but I want you to make a fraction first. Use the fraction method and then convert that fraction into a decimal. I want you to do this right now in your notebook. Go. 8%. If you don't have to write down the words, write 8% as a decimal. Just put 8% down and then do your steps to convert it to a fraction and then convert that fraction into a decimal. Turn 8% into a fraction, turn the fraction into a decimal. When we have percents, what's the denominator always out of? Yeah. So you already know your denominator is 100. And your percent's the numerator. What's the percent? So 8's your numerator. Okay. 8 over 100, or 8 hundredths. Changing that to a decimal, you could divide, right? But Hundredths is a place. So we know we're going to have 2 places behind the decimal. Like that? What does that say? That says 80 hundredths or 8 tenths. We don't want 80 hundredths. We want how many hundredths? We want 8 hundredths. So what number needs to go in the hundredths place? No, in the hundredths place. If I want 8 hundredths because my fraction says 8 over 100, then I need an 8 in the hundredths place. Now, what do we put in this blank spot in the tens place? Yes. So this says 8, and that last digit is in the hundredths place, so it's 8 hundredths. All right, number 2, you're going to do this one again on your own. Write 2% as a decimal, and this time you may use the move the decimal method. Move the decimal. So step 1 is get rid of the percent sign and just write your whole number out. Step 2 is put the decimal at the end of the whole number. Step 3 is to move the decimal how many times? 2 times, but I only have one number here. Should I just move it once then? Nicely done. You have to annex a 0. Good job, Cooper. Annex a 0 and move over your decimal 2 times because it has to be in the hundredths place. Okay, so 2% is the same as 0.02 or 2 hundredths. A 2 in the hundredths place. You also might be looking at this like money. 2 hundredths, 2 out of 100. That looks like 2 cents. How many cents does it take to make $1? 100. That does not say 2 quarters. That says 2 cents. 2 quarters would be 50. All right, we've got percent to a decimal. Now we need to go the other way. Now we need to go decimal to a percent. Now the good news is it's the exact same thing you just learned, but backwards. So really, it's not anything new here. It's just going the other direction. There are 2 methods. We're going to go over the first one, which is the fraction method. So what you need to do is change 38 hundredths or 0.38 and into a percent, but you have to go through a fraction first. So 38 hundredths, you guys know when you just say it out loud, 38 hundredths, that's your fraction, 38 over 100. Or 38 is your numerator and 100 is your denominator because there are 2 numbers behind the decimal place, a 3 and an 8. So you're going to have 2 zeros in your denominator. So step 1 is just to turn this into a fraction. The reason I didn't have you write all the stuff I just told you is because that's old news. You guys have been turning decimals into fractions for quite some time. You should already know how to do that. The decimal goes on top as the numerator, and then start with a 1, and however many digits there are in your decimal, that's how many zeros you put in your denominator. A 3 and an 8 gives you a 0 and a 0. 38 hundredths. Cool. Step 2. Just write the numerator down. The numerator is 38. Step 3, write the percent sign next to it. That's it, 38%. You can, but this is the fraction method. So for the sake of your notes, or if you're asked to solve percent or decimal to a percent with a fraction, this is the steps you'd have to take. As soon as everyone's done writing these notes down, we'll go into the move decimal method. Yes. That's our next method. So here we're going to go from a decimal to a percent using the move the decimal method. No fraction this time. Okay? So here's your decimal, 73 hundredths or 0.73. We need to write that down as a percent. So step one, you're going to move the decimal 2 places to the right. So before we moved it 2 places left to get a decimal answer, we've got a decimal answer. So we're going to go the other direction by going back to a percent. We're going to go to the right this time. And again, it's 2 places because it's out of 100 or hundredths place. So here's our 0.73, 73 hundredths. The decimal moves over 2 times, which gives you a whole number of 73. And then all you have to do is add your percent sign. 73%, done. Which way do you prefer? Do you like fraction and then decimal, or do you like just moving the decimal over? I think moving the decimal over is easier. I don't know if it's easier, it's less steps. Right? Yeah. Oh, okay, wait. People aren't done. Hold on. I'll gotta go back. Okay? All right. So I need a volunteer to come up and write 32% as a decimal, but you have to go the fraction method, meaning it's got to be a fraction first. You have to change the percent to a fraction and then the fraction into a decimal. You have to do that way first. Go ahead, Abby. Abby B. You can take your notebook. Absolutely, you can. You all should be writing this in your notebook right now and solving it on your own. Fantastic. Wait. We're going from a percent to a decimal. You wrote it. You ended up as a percent again. Your last answer needs to be a decimal, not a percent. You went percent, fraction, percent. We need a decimal as your answer. Go change that to a decimal. All right, so I'm going to move all this over because I didn't tell you to write in one box. Sorry. So Abby wrote 32 over what? So that's where you start. 32 the percent over 100 every single time. 32 is going to be your decimal number. You have to have two places behind the decimal or the hundredths spot, which means hundredth spot, tenth spot, decimal goes right there. Okay? So 32% becomes 32 over 100, which then becomes 32 hundredths. There you go, Abby. That was like a perfect shot right between the small gap in the desks. And yes, you can eat it in class. All right, I need someone to solve this one, which is change 6% to a decimal using the move decimal method. No fractions in this one. No fractions. You just got to move the decimal and write your answer down. All right, Yuba. At 6%. 6%. You should be doing this in your notebook right now. And if you're done, your mouth should be closed as Yuba writes his answer up here. Nicely done. 6%, write down 6 with a decimal at the end of it. The decimal has to move how many times? 2. So 6% is not 0.6. That would only be moving the decimal once. Okay. Yuba wrote the 6. He put his decimal. He moved twice. And then he annexed a 0 in that blank spot. You can always put a 0 in that blank spot. So you end up with 6 hundredths. All right, number 3. Using the fraction method, which means you have to make a fraction first, we need 47 hundredths to become a percent. But it's got to go to a fraction first. It's got to go for a fraction first. Kyle? Only let the pen touch the board. Don't let your hand touch the board. All right, good start. So 47, it's in the hundredths place, so it's over 100. Now what are we going to do? Now we need to get it into a percent. Excellent. Just take the numerator, write it as a percent, 47%. Nicely done, Kyle. Last one. Last one is moving the decimal by changing 5/10 into a percent. 5/10. Let's see. Let's get Brenda. Go ahead. I got a girl on this one since we had 2 boys already. I'm just checking to make sure you pay attention. I thought your name was Brenda too. Hilarious. But, you know, looks aren't everything. Hey, she's got a notebook. Let her look. It's okay. You may eat your candy that you won in class, but I better not find any wrappers. So we have 0.5, move the decimal over, we have 5%. Sound good? Terrible. You're all awful. That's not only is it wrong, but you all just agreed blindly to agree with her. So we have one thing that's right. Brenda did one thing right here, which was, okay, look up here. Look up here. How many times did Brenda move the decimal? Yeah, you see the 1, 2 moves. Okay. If this is where she started, that's a terrible decimal. Let's try it again. If she goes 1, 2, you can't leave that spot blank. What has to go there, Kyle? Let's ask somebody who is listening. What do you have to put in that blank spot, Chanel? 50 decimal, which means this is not 5%. It's 50%. Do not pack up yet. Class is not over.